My name is Days. I'm 30 years old. Today I'm going to talk about the day that my parents fired me from the family business. They went bankrupt when I became a rival. It's a pleasure to have you here. Stay tuned until the end and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has gone. And click on like, subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories here on the channel. I remember the exact moment my father told me I was no longer part of the family business. It was a Tuesday morning, around 9:15 a.m. I had just finished reorganizing the logistics schedule for the third time that week. Something no one else seemed capable of doing right, when he asked me to step into his office. The way he said it, so formal like I was a stranger. "Not Daisy, can we talk for a second?" "But Daisy, please come into my office." The door clicked shut behind me, and my mother was already sitting there, stiff as a statue, her lips pressed into that thin, judgmental line I knew too well. "They didn't ask me to sit." My dad cleared his throat. "Your brother and Amanda will be taking over your responsibilities." I blinked. "What responsibilities?" "All of them," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We think it's time you explore other paths." It was like the floor dropped from under me. I had worked at that company for 12 years. Started during college summers, grew with it, built entire departments from scratch. I was the one who saved the business when we lost the warehouse lease in 17. I was the one who stayed up 3 nights straight during the supplier strike to rework the supply chain. And now they were telling me I wasn't needed? Amanda, my brother's wife. She'd married into the family 2 years ago and had done nothing but smile sweetly, drop manipulative comments, and somehow worm her way into every meeting. I had seen the way she looked at my mother, like she was auditioning for the role of favorite daughter. I tried to keep my voice steady. "So I'm fired?" "No one's firing anyone." My mother snapped. "You're being released from daily duties." My heart thudded against my ribs. "Why?" My father finally looked up at me. "Because Amanda brings a fresh perspective. And your brother deserves a chance to lead." I looked between them, waiting for one of them to smile and say it was a joke. Neither did. My voice cracked. "I gave up my 20s for this company." My mother shrugged. "You'll land on your feet. Maybe it's time you think about starting a family." And just like that, I was dismissed. Not just from my job, but from the life I had built, from the identity I had shaped around being useful, needed, essential. I packed my things in silence. No one stopped by my office. No one said goodbye. Later that day, I sat in my car for an hour in the parking lot, too numb to even start the engine. I stared at the building I had helped grow, now full of people who pretended not to see me. I remembered Christmases spent working late on end-of-year reports, birthdays I missed, vacations I never took. All because I believed, truly believed, that loyalty meant something, that family meant something. But apparently, I was replaceable. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. There was an email from my brother titled, "Let's keep this professional." I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I could imagine every word. Polite. Condescending. Fake. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the ease with which they let me go. No fight. No guilt. Just a clean cut. Like I was never meant to belong in the first place. 3 nights later, I overheard something that would burn into my brain forever. I had driven to my parents' house, half hoping they'd apologize, or at least explain. I parked outside and didn't ring the bell. I just sat there, windows down, engine off. Then I heard it. My mother's voice, through the open kitchen window. She never had the right personality for business. Always too emotional. My father replied, "Well, Amanda's got the charm we need. Clients love her." Then a pause. "She's more of a daughter to me than Daisy ever was." The wind didn't blow. The world didn't shift. But something in me snapped silently. I drove off. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, in waves I couldn't control. But in that moment, all I felt was emptiness. And a strange, quiet clarity. They had cut me out like I was the problem. Like I didn't matter. But maybe that was the mistake. Maybe I had spent too long trying to matter to people who were never capable of seeing me. Next, the bitter taste of being left out begins to rot everything she believed about family. The first few weeks after being dismissed felt like falling into a black hole. Every morning, I still woke up at 6:45 a.m. My body hadn't caught up with the new reality. I'd shower, get dressed, even prepare a cup of coffee in my travel mug, only to stare at the front door and realize I had nowhere to go. I stopped wearing makeup. Then I stopped changing out of my pajamas. Eventually, I just stopped opening the curtains. My phone stayed silent. Not one message from anyone at the company. Not even a courtesy text from my brother. People I had mentored, hired, promoted. They acted like I had evaporated. I'd walk past the mirror and barely recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I didn't feel like I existed anymore. I had been erased. One night, around 2 a.m., I scrolled through our company's social media. Amanda was everywhere. Ribbon cuttings. Client luncheons. A new campaign I had pitched months ago was now being launched. Without my name, without a single trace of my involvement. Just her smile, center frame, like she'd built everything from scratch. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the screen. But instead, I just kept scrolling, punishing myself with every photo, every caption. It's not just that they let me go. It's that they pretended I was never part of it. A week later, I ran into an old client at the grocery store. Linda. She used to call me directly anytime she had an issue with an order. We had shared coffee once. Even cried together when she lost her husband. "Oh, Daisy," she said, her smile genuine. "I was just thinking about you. It's such a shame what happened." I froze. "What did you hear?" She leaned closer. "That you needed a break. That you stepped down for personal reasons. That it was getting too stressful." I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny, but because I could see Amanda's fingerprints all over that narrative. "I didn't step down," I said as calmly as I could. "I was pushed out." Her face changed. Eyes widened. A beat of silence passed before she muttered, "I'm so sorry, Daisy." I nodded. "Don't be. It taught me who I can trust." But the truth was, I didn't know who I could trust. I felt like a ghost in my own town. That same night, I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by empty takeout boxes and unopened mail. My therapist's number sat on a post-it note I hadn't dared to dial. I picked up an old notebook and started writing, not with any purpose. Just feelings. Frustrations. Memories. Things I never said out loud. I wrote for hours. My hand cramped. Pages filled with messy handwriting and smudged ink. I wrote about how my mother once called me dramatic for crying after a panic attack. About how my father used to say I took things too personally every time I disagreed with my brother. How Amanda once told me that women like me usually stay single too long. I remembered moments that had bruised me quietly for years, and now on paper they bled. That night, for the first time since losing my job, I fell asleep without tears. The pain hadn't left. But I had finally started naming it. Over the next week, I forced myself to go out. I went to a cafe I used to love. I sat near the window, watched people pass by, pretended I wasn't drowning. The barista asked where I'd been. I lied and said I'd been traveling. Something shifted that afternoon. I saw a flyer for a local business event pinned to the bulletin board. It was small. Free. The kind of thing I would have dismissed months ago. But I took a picture of it. Later that evening, I pulled out my laptop and began researching. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Resources? Networking? Maybe just a sign. What I found was an old note I had written a year ago in my phone. Start something of your own. Even if it's small. I had forgotten I'd even written it. It felt like a whisper from the past. From the version of me that still believed in herself. 3 days later, I walked into that business event. My heart pounded. I wore a blazer 2 sizes too tight, and shoes I hadn't broken in. I kept to the back of the room at first. Watched. Listened. There were other women there, older, younger, all with stories of betrayal, failure, starting over. One woman, Helen, stood out. In her 60s. Sharp, sarcastic, warm. She ran a small logistics consulting firm. We ended up talking for an hour. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. She looked at me and said, "You don't strike me as the type who stays down for long." I didn't believe her. Not yet. But it was the first time in weeks I'd heard something kind that didn't sound hollow. As I drove home that night, an idea began to form. It wasn't fully shaped, but it was there. A spark. Not revenge. Not even redemption. Something quieter. Something mine. What would you do if it were you? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe and activate the bell to receive all notifications so you don't miss the next story. The first thing I did was buy a whiteboard. I hung it in my kitchen next to the pantry. I don't know why that spot felt right. Maybe because it was the one place in the house I still felt in control. At the top, I wrote in thick red marker, Day 1. Underneath it, I started listing names of old clients who used to trust me, people who had depended on my voice, not Amanda's. I didn't call them. Not yet. I just needed to remember they existed, that I had mattered to someone. Then I began sketching out what my business would be, not a replica of my family's company, but something leaner, more humane, with a niche they had always ignored. Small-scale fulfillment and logistics for local handmade goods. Artisans, small vendors, Etsy sellers. The kind of people my parents used to laugh at during meetings. Within a week, my dining table was covered in notebooks, post-its, mock invoices and vendor lists. I worked in sweatpants. Hair up. Music on. No deadlines. No barking voices. Just me. Helen checked in with me twice. She gave me contacts, tips, even let me shadow one of her projects. She didn't ask for anything in return. You're doing the hard thing, she told me once. You're building from pain. That's when it sticks. I didn't know if she was right, but I kept going. I launched quietly. No announcement. No website at first. Just a basic form, a Gmail address, and a phone number. I reached out to 5 people. 3 replied. 1 became a client. I cried after my first invoice was paid. It was barely enough to cover groceries, but it felt different. Cleaner. Honest. Months passed. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was doing. I figured they didn't care. The silence between us had become permanent. A quiet kind of funeral. But word spread. Slowly. Organically. One of my early clients recommended me to another. Then another. I created a system. I rented a small storage space and turned it into a makeshift mini warehouse. I got up early. I made deliveries myself when I had to. I smiled when I dropped off packages. My body ached most nights, but I was free. One morning, while picking up coffee, I saw Amanda at a corner table with a client I used to manage. I froze. She didn't see me. She was laughing, overly animated, tapping her nails against the table like she always did when she was trying to impress. For a split second, I felt rage bubble up. But then it passed. Like an itch I didn't need to scratch anymore. That client called me 2 weeks later. I heard you're doing your own thing now, he said. You have time for a call? I said yes. We signed a contract 3 days later. I was building something real. It was small. Fragile. But mine. I still had bad days. I still sometimes heard my mother's voice in my head telling me I was too sensitive, too difficult. But each time I sent out an invoice, solved a problem, or received a thank you email, that voice got quieter. 6 months after I started, I walked past my parents' old building. It looked different. Tired. The windows needed cleaning. The logo was fading. I stopped in front of the glass door. Inside, I saw new faces. Only a few of the old team remained. Amanda wasn't there. I didn't go in. I just stood there, like a stranger outside a house I no longer lived in. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel the urge to prove anything. I just felt distance. And peace. It started with a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost didn't listen to it. Something told me not to. But curiosity won. Daisy, this is Mark from Finley & Company. We're handling restructuring for Bradford Logistics. We'd like to speak with you regarding some operational overlaps. Bradford Logistics. My family's company. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. Restructuring? They were failing. I called Helen. They're bleeding money, she said, her tone flat. A client of mine just pulled out of a deal with them. Said the management's a mess. Rumors are, your brother made some very expensive mistakes. I should have felt vindicated. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I felt a tight coil in my chest. A mix of dread, curiosity, and something too tangled to name. 2 weeks later, my mother called. Her name lit up my phone like a warning flare. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Just 6 words. "We need to talk. Call me." I didn't. By now, my own company had picked up real momentum. I hired a part-time assistant. I upgraded my storage unit. I even started looking for a small office space. Clients were happy. Word was spreading. One afternoon, I got an email from a supplier I used to work with during my time at Bradford. It was polite, professional, and desperate. "Would you be open to revisiting a partnership? We're shifting accounts away from Bradford. Too much volatility." I stared at the screen. Me. They were coming to me. I replied with a simple, "Let's set up a call." And I smiled. The next message came from my father. It was a text. "Dad, we should talk. The company's struggling. Your brother is overwhelmed. Amanda's left." Amanda left. That part made me pause. My brother had built his role on arrogance and shortcuts. Amanda had played her games. And now, with things crumbling, she was gone. Typical. I didn't reply. A few days later, I pulled into the parking lot of the building where Bradford Logistics used to be alive and buzzing. It was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the receptionist's desk was empty. I saw my brother pacing through the glass, phone to his ear, looking thinner, agitated. He didn't see me. I left before he could. That evening, I finally opened my mother's voicemail again. Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need your help, Daisy. The company might go under. You know the systems better than anyone. Please, let's talk." Not once did she say sorry. Not once did she say she missed me. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I deleted the message. Helen asked me over dinner, "Are you tempted?" I thought about it. The girl I used to be, desperate for approval, might have run back just to be needed. But the woman I was becoming? She saw the truth. They weren't reaching out because they had changed. They were reaching out because they had fallen. There's a difference. Later that week, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a worn folder with company documents, my old proposals, reports I had written, even a few internal memos with my notes still scribbled in the margins. There was a sticky note on top. "You built this. We're sorry." It wasn't signed. I threw the folder in a drawer and locked it. Because now I was building something else. Something I wouldn't have to beg to be part of. The meeting wasn't planned. I didn't call them. I didn't agree to anything. I just showed up. It was a Tuesday morning, just like the one when they fired me. I drove past the building twice before I parked. The front lobby was colder than I remembered. Maybe the heat was out. Maybe I just felt numb. The receptionist, a new girl, probably 22, looked up at me without recognition. "I'm here to see Claire and Robert Bradford," I said. "They're in a meeting." "Tell them it's Daisy." Her eyebrows lifted. She stood and walked off. Seconds later, my father appeared in the hallway. He looked older, heavier. But when he saw me, he smiled like nothing had ever happened. "Daisy," he said, voice light, almost rehearsed. "You came." I didn't hug him. I didn't smile. He led me down the hallway. My mother was sitting in what used to be the conference room, looking at a stack of printed reports. She glanced up, startled for half a second, then pulled her face into something resembling relief. "Daisy, thank you for coming." I sat. Quietly. I didn't greet them. My father started talking immediately about numbers, transition plans, possible consulting work. It was all polite. Formal. Like I was a stranger they'd hired. They wanted me to help stabilize things. Maybe train a few staff. Maybe revive the core systems. I didn't say a word. Then my mother leaned forward. "We know things weren't handled well before." Before. Like it was a scheduling error. I looked at her. "Handled?" She flinched a little. "You were upset. But we think enough time has passed to." "To what?" I cut in. "Pretend it didn't happen?" Silence. I kept my voice low. "You didn't just fire me. You erased me. You let Amanda take everything I built. You called me emotional, unfit. I heard you say she was more of a daughter than I ever was. My father's jaw clenched. My mother blinked fast. I worked for you. I gave you everything. And you didn't just cast me aside. You pretended I never existed. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time, there was no script. My father spoke. We were trying to do what was best for the company. No, I said. You were trying to do what was easiest for you. You never saw me. You saw a placeholder. A convenience. My voice didn't shake. Not once. I came here today not because I want to help, I said, rising to my feet. I came to see if I'd feel anything. Regret. Sadness. Nostalgia. I looked around the room. I feel nothing. They didn't stop me as I walked out. That afternoon, I took a long walk. No music. No phone. Just the sound of my own breath. My own thoughts. For years, I'd waited for an apology. For recognition. A gesture. Something. But that moment in the conference room made everything clear. They weren't sorry. They were just desperate. And now, I didn't need them to be sorry. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. Later that week, Helen and I grabbed lunch. I told her everything. Do you think they'll survive? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe. But they'll never recover what really mattered. What's that? She looked at me. You. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Because she was right. They lost me. And they'd never get me back. 3 years passed. I never spoke to my parents again. No holiday cards. No phone calls. No updates. Just silence. A silence I had once feared, then resisted, and eventually, cherished. My company had grown more than I imagined. We moved into a proper office with real desks, windows, a break room filled with light and fresh coffee. I had 5 employees. A team I trusted. We weren't massive. We didn't make headlines. But we were consistent, loyal, human. Clients stayed. Some came from referrals. Some were people I'd never met who said they heard Daisy's name meant something. I'd sit in my office some days watching the team work and feel this quiet sense of rightness. Like I had finally arrived, not to a destination someone else designed for me, but to my own place built with my own 2 hands. One afternoon, I flew to a small artisan conference in Colorado. I was invited to speak on logistics for micro-businesses. Nothing big, just 20 women in a modest room, all of us sitting in a circle. During a break, a woman approached me. Late 50s, warm smile, soft voice. Daisy Bradford, she asked. Yes. I used to work for your parents. Long time ago. Shipping department. I blinked. Really? She nodded. I left when the culture changed. But I remember you. You were the only one who ever said thank you. We talked for a while. She now ran her own small business. Struggled a bit. Was looking for a partner in fulfillment. I handed her my card. She looked at it like it was gold. And in that moment, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Legacy wasn't about buildings or logos. It was about impact. Months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Bradford Logistics sold to private equity group. A handwritten note at the bottom said, "They finally let it go." There was no emotion in me when I read it. No joy. No bitterness. Just closure. I folded the paper, placed it in a box of memories I rarely opened, and slid it under my bed. My peace didn't come in a dramatic moment. It came in a routine. Feeding my dog. Watching the sunset from my porch. Answering emails from women trying to start again. And one Sunday morning, I stood at the farmer's market with a cup of coffee in hand, when I heard my name. Daisy. I turned. It was Linda, the client I had bumped into at the grocery store years ago. She looked the same. Maybe even better. "I'm working with your team now," she said, beaming. "Your girl Claire is a dream." We hugged. It was warm. Natural. "You saved my business," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. So I just smiled. Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving anything. It was about building a life where I didn't have to fight to be seen. A life where I was enough, exactly as I was. far from them. And finally, at peace. If you like stories like these, click like, subscribe, activate the bell and send it to someone you think will also like it.